Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. Super excited to showcase our speaker for our Firme Role Model series, which is focusing on Native American Heritage Month. It's an opportunity to explore, again, heritage, culture, and experience of Indigenous people, both historically and in American life today. So I'm very excited to have an opportunity to introduce you to our guest speaker for this series. And once I read her bio, we'll go ahead and move into our questions. And again, also as a reminder, it's really important that, again, Native American Heritage Month is not just this month, but is throughout the year. We really want you to really use this as an opportunity to get to learn a little bit about the community, but also to keep exploring, keep learning in order for you to have, again, that awareness that how folks are contributing throughout all the different sectors of careers that we have here in the States. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with reading our bio here for Heather Hostler, is the incoming Executive Director of California Indian Legal Services. She brings an extensive background in the California State Executive Branch as a gubernatorial appointee under two administrations. Governor Brown appointed her in the 2012 to serve as Chief Deputy Tribal Advisor, working with the first tribal advisor to implement Executive Order B10-11. They were in charge of advising state agencies and departments in creating their tribal consultation policies, resolving issues at the appropriate government to government level, and advising department and agency leadership on the development of viable tribal affairs relationships. In 2019, Ms. Hostler was appointed by Governor Newsom as the first Director of Tribal Affairs for the California Department of Social Services. She was a visionary leader who established the Office of Tribal Affairs, OTA. Ms. Hostler was a dynamic change maker, and her leadership resulted in the integration of tribal impact considerations in policies, regulations, and legislations. OTA serves as a model for state agencies to create more equitable government agencies grounded in tribal consultation and government to government working relationships. Ms. Hostler is a member of the Hupa Valley Tribe located in Humboldt County. She received her BA in Native American Studies and Law Government from Humboldt State University and was recognized as a distinguished alumni in 2016. So again, welcome. We're really excited that you're here with us today in order to participate in our Firme Role Model for, again, Native American Heritage Month. So like I mentioned, we have a couple of questions for you. And so I'm excited to get to know you a little bit more and to give our students an opportunity to see how, again, you can have a phenomenal career and still hold true to your identity. And so the first question I have for you is, what were your experiences growing up? How did your identity impact your career decisions that you made? Or how did your identity impact your journey?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. This is great. Like I said early on, these are the things I love to talk about. So growing up, just to give you a little background on that. So in my bio, we talked about I'm from Humboldt County. So very rural, very far north, so close to the Oregon border. So when folks say, California, they think, bigger city centers. And we had, I think our largest city was like 40,000. So very small town areas, but incredibly beautiful. We had the Pacific Ocean on the coast. And then where my reservation is 60 miles northeast of the coast, it was the Trinity River that ran through my reservation. And we had beautiful mountains and trees, and of course in Humboldt County and Mendocino County we have the redwoods, and so just a beautiful place to be. I lived on the reservation until I was 9. And just really here's what I know about it, because oftentimes you hear, about the really kind of depressing situations of the reservation, but what I didn't probably know at the time, but now really just kind of look back on, is those cultural values that were instilled in me by being with my family. Very communal, very much about what was important for the family, for the broader community and our people, versus kind of a lot of individualistic focus, where it's kind of, you'll see a lot of times in a lot of kind of the American cultures where it's very specific about kind of you as an individual, where our cultural value was, how you take care of your family, how you are together, and that's generationally, and a lot of importance that was placed there. And the other thing is that, being on the reservation provided for a lot of cultural exposure as far as our ceremonies and our lifeways. So most folks don't know much about Native Americans and tribal communities, and a lot of what has been learned has been through Hollywood or through TV, and we don't really adequately learn about it in K-12 education. So what the benefit and what we were able to do by living on the reservation in our tribal community really just kind of planted those seeds about strong identity of who we are and where we came from. There's a lot of social ills. I won't downplay that. There's a lot of challenges, generational trauma, things that happen that are really hard areas, but there's a lot of beauty and there's a lot of good. So my father is a full-blooded member of the tribe. My mom's non-Native. So I had also that kind of cultural distinction. My mom lived on the reservation since she was 15, though, so very much a part of the community. But certainly she, was non-Native and a part of our community, and those, of course, have challenges as well. My father was a tribal leader. So in tribes, we have our own sovereign nations and accompanying governments. And so he was duly elected to the tribal council to make decisions for our tribe. And so I really had also not only kind of the cultural understanding our, ceremonies, our life ways, and the values that were instilled, but I also had the experience of him being a tribal leader and really doing a lot of advocacy and fighting on national levels and state levels, for that matter, for issues that are important to our people. A lot of it has to do with, preserving the fisheries, preserving our water, preserving the things that we have had since time immemorial. Mm-hmm. So that was really important for me to see, because I saw kind of we'd had both the cultural and the kind of political status experience. And so I moved to the coast after the third grade, and had a whole kind of new experience, right, where predominantly white students I went to school with, and apparently I said things funny, and they called it out all the time, and I didn't understand. And even though my mom was white, even though I predominantly grew up in the culture and the vernacular and all of the things of my tribal community, and didn't realize that. So that was definitely an interesting adjustment for me, but made the most of it, and certainly had great experiences there too. But I knew I think where I had the benefit is having, my parents who are really, poured a lot into us, but having really clear about who I was and where I came from. And so I felt like that's always been a consistent theme for me of, I can draw back on that. So I would say, if I'm thinking about my upbringing and how it contributed, it was certainly has to do with centering myself around really kind of the identity of being a Native American person who is a part of my community, who I understand the importance of giving back to my community. And I certainly, a kind of a key theme for me has always been, I would say, I'm responsible to my community. I can't remember the other question because I think I got going on the tangent for the how I was raised and where I came from.
No, I think that's perfect. I think um, it's great to know and to hear again how you receive that information as a young person, right? Because I think that that is something that some of us may not have that connection, that linkage to that cultural part of our community until much later on. So it's very helpful to see how you were able to receive that at a very young age. And so let me ask you, actually, it moves more into the second question, which is how has your cultural identity or your identities shaped your career and maybe some of your experiences in higher education?
Absolutely.
Great.
So I went into school at HSU, Humboldt State University, as a fisheries major. And that really kind of was born from my tribe offered a summer internships, and so I chose to do our fisheries program. And so, amazing experience for being a teenager, and I got to go out on the rivers, and we're in boats checking the fish traps and doing counts. And I mean, this is the life, right? Just got to kind of be in the really wonderful part of the fisheries program. And so when I started at Humboldt State, that was where I was going, but kind of quickly realized that the science part isn't my favorite, right? That's not where I feel like I'm more on the advocacy side, right? Like, we got to protect these. I didn't want to kind of be the biologist figuring out all the details. So I made a change in my major to Native American Studies, Law and Government. And it was a space I knew. It was a space I felt like I was comfortable in, I could excel. And I knew all of that because of my exposure to, my community, to the issues, because my dad was a tribal leader. I knew there was a lot of need there, and I kind of felt I caught my stride when I started doing courses like that. So here's another distinction is, so as a Native person, I know my tribal history. I know our oral traditions tell me about our people. We carve and date back 20,000 years to the village that I'm from, that we, were through, the colonization and the attacks on tribal communities throughout California, because we were so far north and because we were, set in rugged mountains. We didn't get removed from our lands like a lot of folks did. So, I really know, like, here's where my people are, here's where generations have been, buried. This is my place that I come from. So, we really, I have that kind of grounding in thinking about, the work that needs to be done. But where we, kind of had a lot of the issues that folks weren't able to remedy is where I thought, well, that could be where I can help. That can be where I can help bring back to the forefront some of these issues. And but I didn't know how it set in a larger context of federal Indian law. I didn't understand all of the policies. I heard about it, I dabbled in it because of my exposure to it, but what I didn't know is about all of the frameworks that the United States set up to work with tribes as sovereign nations and its specificity. Which that matters, right? So it's one thing to have that cultural identity, to understand who I am, where I come from, understand what's happening in my community, but understanding the framework, understanding those institutionalized systems that are put in place, understanding, why does this seem so crazy, but we do it the same way? All of that history, like, that's where my eyes were opened. So didn't, kind of was like, you're a Native American Studies major, but, don't you already know that? And it's like, actually, I don't. I had to learn it. I knew enough to understand kind of a high level, but to make impact, it takes both, right? So really that made a huge difference for where I wanted to go in my career. After I came out of my undergrad, which, by the way, took me a long time. It took me took me 6 years. I had a child when I was 20.
Mhm.
I was working 30 hours a week, and going to school full time. So, this was no, kind of dream, college experience. I was, really having to dig in. And so I also took leadership roles on campus because apparently I just am a glutton for punishment and sign up for these things where I'm like, why am I doing this? And I have a daughter actually who goes to UC Santa Cruz, and she's in the same boat as far as like leadership roles. And she's like, why am I doing this? And I'm like, quite honestly. So when I came out of, my undergrad, I went to work for my tribe. So I was a political appointment from the chairman of the tribe, who is, he's the leader of our tribe virtually. So sometimes it's like an executive director or a CEO level. And so we were doing a lot of the day-to-day. So really, after having that education, formal education, coming into my tribe, that's when I call it the baptism by fire, because it was like, oh, here's real life. Here's what actually happens in, these tribal government structures. I was able to really work on, a lot of tribal member issues. So, with tribal governments, you have tribal members coming and saying, hey, what is the chairman going to do for me? Because I have this really tough situation that needs to be fixed. So he's an elected leader responsible to, his constituents. And so I was doing a lot of that frontline work for him. And then we were also able to do really, super exciting, cool things like go to, Washington, D.C., meet with the Congress people on Capitol Hill and really kind of lobby our positions, which that was the part I loved. I loved the Washington, D.C. I'm in the, heart of the nation. It's like such an energy. And I'm like, this is it for me. But I had a small child at home. I couldn't move to Washington, D.C. So, but really that experience planted some major seeds where I thought I have to get, I want to do something like this someday. So I think I answered that question.
Yeah, you did, and I do want to actually, say thank you for taking the time to also give us a little bit more information about your academic journey, right? That it's okay to not serve that traditional role, right? Life happens, folks have kids or folks have, other things in their lives where they have to kind of pause and really focus on other things and then, come back. So, so I'm glad that you mentioned that. And also the fact that you were able to really share with us the kind of, how you said it about getting involved, right? And sometimes I think as folks of color in general, when we decide to get involved, we really get involved, right? And so we see a lot of the issues going on. And so that's helpful to know because, a lot of people that are going to be watching this, some of them might have hesitations about getting involved or some, are still trying to find what works for them. So can you share maybe something about that motivation to get involved in, within that aspect of your academic career? What motivated you to get involved? Because that might help some of our students who are kind of struggling if how much involvement should they get in, right?
Yeah, no, happy to think about that with, I think I have an interesting perspective now because I have a daughter who's 20 and she's going to school and she's like, this sorority is, driving me crazy. And, those are the things that, but here's what I'm telling her, at least when, getting involved. These are the lessons you are going to learn as a young person that you're going to take with you into your career. So the things that you're dealing with at this, leadership level, I could deal with in any given situation in my career over the last 15 years. And so always thinking about hard things that happen maybe in leadership, being really like, hey, this is your learning experience. It's sort of like, you don't want to keep learning the same lesson over and over again. So, having those opportunities. The other thing is where I feel like, in high school, I was also into the leadership roles too. But it was always something that really mattered to me. So in high school, Native American Club president, right? So we had a mission. We were very much, looking at what we can do to promote cultural awareness on campus. We were certainly like fighting the man too. We were always coming to the administration and saying, this isn't fair. We're being treated unfairly because of these situations. So we were always, so for me, it always went back to, what do I care about and what makes me tick? And I think the same thing, on campus at HSU, I was president for the Indian Teacher Education Personnel Program, which was not, I didn't want to be a teacher, but it was a community gathering. And so we also really thought about other issues of kind of in the same vein. So where I see the most value, and part of what I've talked to my daughter about, she was involved with the California Native Vote Project, and she's an intern at the American Indian Resource Center on campus. But I encourage her, get involved into the things that you feel like you have passion and purpose. Because it's not going to be the same for everyone, and I wouldn't have joined a sorority. That wasn't my where I was in my college experience, but she, wanted to have a broader college experience that I'm so thankful for. That, she moved away. She was in the dorms as much as she could be with, COVID and all of those restrictions, but she wanted to understand kind of broadly the campus life. And so this was something that she was interested in. It's been a challenge, but I think that here's what I know about leadership, and it took me, a long time to learn it. I think is that point, and that it is refined over the course of many, many years. Nobody just shows up and is like, I'm a great leader. I'm just gonna, kill it, and everybody's gonna be, cheering me on. I made a lot of missteps. And I can think about even to my college years and missteps I've made, but I've learned from them. I've done a lot of kind of understanding. In hindsight, it's not always in the moment, but where I could have done better, and thinking about how I want to show up in this world. And I think that's really important, because it's easy for there to be ego. There's easy for there to be doing things for the wrong reasons. But I think when we come from, quote unquote, disadvantaged communities, we understand kind of the weight that's riding on our shoulders to do well. And so we feel that need to go into these leadership positions, or we feel the need to really do great. But I think most importantly, is understanding how do you want to portray yourself to the world, but most importantly, I think, how do you want to impact this world, and then go kind of figure out what connects with your purpose and your passion.
Great, thank you. I know that the folks that are going to be listening to this are going to be really taking a lot from you, because I think that's really important. You're also kind of validating that it's okay to, have, to learn from your mistakes, right? Because I think sometimes we have some folks that just want to avoid mistakes, but then, that's how we grow. And so I'm glad you mentioned that. So the other question that I had for you, in your career or even in college, how did you deal with challenges that be microaggressions or discrimination, or how did you overcome challenges? Anything that you want to share with folks?
Sure. There are so many, right? I feel like there's especially, you can just look back and really name some of the moments where, it's like, wow, that was really bad. And I think where, I think I've evolved on how I change it. I think one note, though, is why I feel like it's been so important for the social justice movements that have happened in the last few years, is that I think there's language assigned to it. I almost feel validated of like, yes, that's exactly what it was. And I was always sort of like, oh, now, you don't need to make a big deal about that, right? So if I think about kind of in high school, there were always things that were said. Where I dealt with it is I addressed it head on, and that may just be part of my upbringing. I'm not sure if, kind of in the moments, I remember really fiercely fighting for kind of when derogatory remarks were made. And I think that's right to name it and call it out to the light, because oftentimes what we do is like, just kind of take a deep breath and move on. And sometimes, hey, that might be a right for an appropriate situation. But, over the course of even college, I remember having arguments with professors who said, well, what happened to Native Americans was not genocide. I mean, this is in the higher learning institutions. I'm like, absolutely, what happened to Indigenous people across the world or across North America and South America, that's genocide, textbook. And so what I remember always kind of doing is trying to fight my corner on it, but it was also exercising some frustration. It's the gaslighting thing where it's almost like make you feel crazy for saying it. And I experienced that also with my daughters. So I have 2 daughters, and year after year, I have to check the curriculum to see what they're teaching my children, because it's damaging when you have Native American kids who know their background, they know where they come from. We talk about these things very regularly, and so my kids are having to correct the teachers. And so we're constantly having those conversations, and where it was, I would often hear, well, you're welcome to come do a presentation in class. And I said, my job's over here. This one's your job, right? So I'm happy to send you resources, but it's your due diligence to do the work. And so I don't know that necessarily worked, where I think it's a bigger issue than that. But what I recall is always bringing up the issue. I think there's so much more willingness to listen now from folks, whereas in the past I was the nuisance. My youngest daughter, she is Afro-Indigenous, so she's Black and Native American. And what, that was a whole new set of issues also. So where anti-Blackness and sentiment is a real thing and across cultures, and where I saw, in the school systems that she encountered was very dismissive. So she would have, experiences where, one child said, I don't like Black people, but I like you, right? So then my daughter's like, what do I do with that? And she's a child trying to navigate. So bringing that to the attention of the teacher was very dismissive. Like, well, oh, no, that she's a nice girl. That's not what she meant, right? Instead of addressing it head on. And so part of, my strategy has been in my career in the workplace, because I worked at the state. So for many years, in particular at the California Department of Social Services, I was in a department format. And so, there were really smart, well-intentioned, fantastic folks who just didn't know anything about tribes as governments or Native Americans in a modern day context because of the lack of education throughout our systems in the United States. So they would say offhanded things all the time. And so you get put into positions with colleagues that you care about, that it's not the racist that kind of tell, here's how it is. It's unconscious bias. It's a lack of understanding and awareness. And so you have to navigate it in a different way, because you need to care about the person and how they receive the message, which constantly puts it back on the brown person, right? So continually thinking about the audience, but also, kind of my system has always been to, whether it's popular or not, to always raise the issue. And and I'm seeing progress in areas. I'm seeing folks think about it more, and I can't take credit for that, but I think that's internalizing it. I think is when we get into situations where it becomes too much, and we can't keep things in, doesn't necessarily help us affect the change in the rest of the world.
Great, thank you. I think that's really important that you shared that, and as well as, again, that sometimes those fights are within school systems, they're with people and coworkers. So I think it's really important to have that opportunity to know that, you have to find what strategy works for you, right? So let me ask you then this other question. What does your support system look like, especially as you're navigating your career? What does your support system look like for you? If you can share.
Sure. So a few things. So of course, my family and my community are always going to be at my foundational pieces of, what I do. My father has since passed away, but my mom is a CEO of a tribe, and certainly has the experience, and so really relying on my family who has the experience. But additionally, I'm really thinking about kind of broadly in my career, like having important partnerships and relationships that folks who are doing maybe similar or related things that I am is really important. So I have really close friends who are CEOs of tribal health clinics, and I have folks who are in other sectors that may be related to the tribal work as well, and really understanding who the key players are throughout the state, to really know I don't have to do this on my own. Right. This is I think building your network matters. I have a circle that's small, that's, those are my friends where I spend time with them in outside, and they also have these careers, but I have this other broader network that I would call also part of the support system, where I don't need to reinvent the wheel. I don't need to feel like I'm an island alone in this. They're often going to be dealing with some of the same things that I am. At the state level, I had a team that I created that, we were each other's support system. So, oftentimes you might have to have have the confidants where you can say, that was really hard. This person kind of really crossed the line on how they said X, but be able to come back out in a professional way and address it, and then show up in that conversation the way you want to show up versus an emotional response. But that oftentimes your support system helps you with that. I had he was one of my staff people, but we always called him the nice guy, right? So I'd say, hey, did this come off too snappy? When I was trying to, and he would be honest with me, and he would say, yes, that was probably a little bit too much of sharp edges or not. So having people who will be honest with you, and really understanding that people will give you feedback if you're off track. We get off track. It's easy to go down roads when we're kind of in the moments and not understanding kind of a bigger picture. So family, community, support system is, have close friends who really can understand kind of from a career perspective, that can support you in that way, and then that broader network. But continually, I want to bring this up, and I don't know how related it is, but it was kind of surprising. So when the press release went out that I, was brought on as the executive director at the California Indian Legal Services, I was incredibly touched by, of course, Facebook, where everybody in my tribal community is on it. Even my 88-year-old aunt is on Facebook. But everybody just celebrated me, right? And we're taught to be very humble in our communities, right? We're not to kind of showboat and be look at me. And so that certainly, is our cultural value to not to be out in front like that. So But what is said to me is, wow, like the people I didn't even, would think would share this, on Facebook are celebrating me and our accomplishments. So I do think always keep that, as part of, as we are thinking about how to give back to our communities, that they're proud of you. They want you to do good. And that also, for me, that's a huge support system for kind of understanding, it's not only my family and my friends, but it's my people, my community, my ancestors are all, pushing me to, wanting me to do great.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. And also, again, that important is family, right? But also knowing that, it's important to also build outside the family, right? And that system. And I also have to acknowledge that I'm glad that you say you have the nice guy, but it's also something that, I think as folks of color in general, brown folks, like, that we have to have people like that, right? Just to, check. I loved how you mentioned about the edges, right? Because that's something, again, that we have to navigate sometimes. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because as our students are, moving along in their careers, it's important for them to know that there are some unique challenges that sometimes folks of color need to deal with. And so that is something, right, about kind of being strategic on how we communicate certain things to certain individuals to make sure that it's effective, right, that they can understand it.
Right.
So,
No, I remember early in my career, I think there's double standards. I do. I think, brown person is perceived, in a different way than, non-brown folks are perceived when they say the same thing. And I learned that, not that we have to necessarily subscribe to that, but, I got early in my career, oh, she's being intimidating. Because I asked somebody to do the job that was dependent on getting, grants out the door. And they said, I'm not going to do it. And I said, well, you have to do it. And I became the intimidating one because somebody else didn't want to, do what their responsibility was. And so that's unfair. That's unjust. And, now I can name it. But I do think that, part of what you just said, I think is really key to that. How do we communicate to the world? And I always want to try all of the things I can until I have to have a sharp edge, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And so we're already coming to our time for our interview. I know that individuals give folks that are here with us an opportunity to ask more clarifying questions. But I want to go ahead and ask you this final question in regards to what advice would you give to undergrad students that are watching this? What do you think, just if you can spend some time on, what advice would you give our UC Merced students that are watching this interview?
Sure. I'm going to give you the advice I give my daughter, since she's in the same situation of being an undergrad. So kind of top of mind is really lean in and draw from who you are and where you come from. I feel like because, we have a lot of beautiful cultures and we have a lot of things that are different than American mainstream. I know that there are, at times, over the last, 50, 75 years, there's been the assimilation or, things that we need to, be more like the mainstream. Don't. Really draw on who you are, where you come from. That's going to empower you. That's the soul tie piece of, figuring out, what you do. So know that, be comfortable in your own skin and what you're doing, because, I believe everybody has a purpose on this earth, and, where, you can do the best is when you're in that purpose, and that has everything to do with who you are and where you come from. And, good, better, and different. It's, very much figure that piece out. And it helps you also in your leadership roles. So understanding who you are and your cultural identity and all of that, that's certainly, that's going to make you a great leader, because others are going to see that authenticity in you. Here's here's some like unvetted advice, but this is where I feel like I learned. I'm an executive director running a legal organization. I'm not a lawyer. So this is two-part advice. You don't let things hold you back. Folks have said, I think it was like a quote that it's like somebody much less qualified is doing the work that you thought you weren't qualified to do. Right. Because I'm like, I can't do that. Like, I'm not, I don't have all these higher ed degrees. I don't have, but there's things that I've learned and in my leadership positions and my work experience that I really have. I feel like just, things I held myself back for, I really could have done a great job at. And so I'm leaning into that now. So don't hold yourself back because you feel like you don't measure up in any way. Because chances are you exceed that threshold. On the other side of that, and this is what I'm telling my daughter, finish your higher education before you get into your career path. So if you are planning on going to grad school, law school, any of the other, kind of graduate level school, do it now. Because I'd love to go back to school now. I've been looking at it online, especially when we were, in COVID, and I have a mortgage. I have, a lot riding on. I'm raising kids. I got, a lot on my plate for work responsibilities too. I'm running a statewide organization. So me thinking about going back to school right now, even though I would like to, is a challenge. So if you can, because my daughter, I bring this up, my daughter's like, I want to do a gap year maybe. And I thought, don't do that because I took off and I'm trying to like let it be your decision. But I did the same thing. I'm just going to wait because I was burnt out. I was raising a kid. I was working full time. I, had a lot going on. It took me 6 years to finish my undergrad. So, but I really wish I would have, even taken that gap year, but then went back. But I got into the workforce where I learned a ton, but it does make the path easier, right? If I had that little fancy UCLA law degree or Stanford, something rather, or even just, I could go to UC Santa Cruz with my daughter and have a graduate degree, but those things do help you. So if you can, I would say plow on through. Just get it done, and then you can be done and launch into your career. So those are things I would say that you really need to think about. Forming your networks matters. So pay attention to your relationships because a lot of times opportunities are based on relationships. It's you'll see a lot of folks who get places where you go, how'd they get there? And a lot of time it's because somebody knows somebody who knows somebody, where sometimes in our culture, in our Black and brown communities, we don't have that, it's, a lot of times it has to do with wealth and careers that came from years before. We don't have that necessarily all the time. We don't have a rich, uncle who knows such and such at this place. And that's just the reality of, maybe not having the generational wealth that others might. So, but nonetheless, make relationships as you step through your undergrad and your career and maintain those to a certain level. I think that's what's great about seeing LinkedIn and things like that. But understanding kind of where you're going and keep those relationships and networks. So we too can get to places based off of our relationships. And networks. So, and then, just most of all, it's like, anything is, not to give up and to keep going and to persevere and take deep breaths, whatever, if you have, spirituality or faith or, and, how you draw that power, that's important. That's really important because that's, oftentimes part of who we are. And, I know a lot of times I look back and like, how did I make it through that? And it wasn't on my own. Right. So I would say that's super important. And, the other thing is we all go through hard things, right? Nobody's life is easy. Everybody's going through hard things. And so understanding how you learn from them and how you navigate through those taking care of yourself is super important, because we'll burn ourselves out if we try to stay in that mode too long.
Yeah.
I think that's my
Well,
advice for right now.
Thank you, Heather. This was a great female role model
I don't hear
interview
you.
because, can you hear me?
Hmm.
Can you all hear me? I think you can hear me. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Maybe I muted.
Okay, perfect. No, I just want to say thank you. This was really helpful because, again, bringing us back to the importance of your identities, but also about faith. So I'm glad that you talked about faith and spirituality, because in many communities of color, that's a motivation, right? And that's something that we can use as a leverage, not seen as something as a disadvantage, but really an advantage. And everything that you mentioned, hopefully folks that are watching this can take away some pearls of wisdom in regards to how they can navigate their academic and their career. And so again, from the CARE office and our female role model folks, we're really excited and thankful that you were here today and that you were able to share a little bit about your culture and about some helpful tips. And we are going to upload this again to our YouTube channel. And so we're gonna go ahead and end our recording at this time. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. This was super fun for me.